Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the Bold Badass Business Show. I am so thrilled today that in the house we have Carolyn Stern. And she is not stern, like that kind of stern. Carolyn is a best-selling author. She's the author of this amazing book, The Emotionally Strong Leader. She's been featured in Forbes and all sorts of famous journals. And she is an award-winning executive coach, presenter, author, and speaker. We are so lucky to have her here, everybody. So pull out your pens and papers. Stop walking the frickin' dog and listen up, because today we're talking about how your Achilles heel can also be your genius in business. Welcome to the show, Carolyn.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm thrilled you're here, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busyness. I know you are a woman on the go. And I know that our listeners are wanting to know right off the bat, I've really enjoyed in your book how you talk about being a highly sensitive person, a very emotional child. And I definitely was as well, the HSP through and through. And I wanted to ask you, how was that? And when did you realize that actually this would turn into your life's work?
Yeah, like I said to you offline, that I was an emotional child. That's what I was told my whole life, highly sensitive. Now I'm making a living out of it. I think the challenge is not that I felt things deeply, because I still do. The challenge is that I felt things deeply and I didn't know what to do with it. Now, what emotional intelligence has taught me is how to be bigger and stronger than my emotions. So, how to look at your emotions sort of almost like you're an observer of yourself from above, and recognize how you're feeling, reflect on where that feeling comes from, regulate your emotions, kind of regain your balance, reset, pause, gain perspective, calm down, and then really respond, but in an appropriate and respectful manner. I didn't do that. I just let my emotions run amok. And it wasn't until I became more objective about my feelings and said, okay, what am I feeling? And what is this feeling telling me about me or the situation, that I could kind of look for as an objective bystander and do something about it, rather than letting my emotions be in the driver's seat of me. I finally am in the driver's seat of my emotions.
I love that. And actually, I think a lot of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, does this sort of thing where you go up and you're really kind of an observer, as you say, looking down and analyzing yourself, but getting some distance from the heat of the moment, the emotional moment. Um, to analyze and to decide, to regulate, to decide, is this really the way I want to react? And what other choices do I have?
Yeah.
I think that's so powerful.
Yeah. And the problem is when we're in the heat of the moment, and your boss gives you an unrealistic deadline, you kind of want to tell your boss to screw off. But by doing that, that moment in time could define you forever. You could lose your job. You could be written up for insubordination. There could be lots of things that could happen if you let your emotions take over. But if you pause, and I always say kind of creating a space between the emotion and the trigger, right? The trigger in that case is the unrealistic deadline. The emotion might be anger. If you pause between the trigger and the emotion and what you want to do, the response and the impact, you can then make a conscious choice. So in that case, as much as the low EQ response could be, yeah, I want to say, screw you, the impact of that response could be, I could lose my job or I could get written up. But if I take a moment and say, okay, what's another alternative way of responding? I could let my boss know I'm angry, but in a calm way. I could say, I'm angry, I'm frustrated that, you didn't give me this deadline until, late on a Friday afternoon. And what I'd like you to do in the future is give me more, lead time so that I can plan and coordinate appropriately. And by doing that and having that conversation, or even saying to your boss, hey, I can finish project X by today, but the other project you gave me, that's going to have to wait till next week. By you then negotiating with your boss. They might not love your response, but they'll respect you for setting a boundary and say, here's what is okay and here's what's not okay.
Mm, absolutely. And I love that you're saying, have that time, that pause where you get out of your reptilian brain because, we know the reptilian brain could also be not just telling them screw you or F you. It could also be hitting somebody, it'd be some crazy stuff.
That's right. That's right. And a lot of people struggle with emotional regulation, right?
Yes.
Being able to self-regulate and know that that's out there, that some find this easier than others. And so kind of paying attention to, am I an impulsive decision maker? Do I make decisions rashly? Do I press pause? And as much as I, want to buy that beautiful shirt, or I want to eat that cupcake or drink that glass of wine, can I press pause and resist temptation to think about, what is the impact of me doing that in that moment? And then by doing that, you can be that observer of yourself. And like I said, this took 25 years. Like I'd say 9 out of 10 times, Barnsley, I am in the driver's seat of my emotions. But there is by far, I'm not sitting here on the other line saying to you, oh, I've got it all figured out. I'm perfect. I'm a masterpiece. No, I'm a work in progress, just like the rest of you. But the 1 out of the 10 times that I do let my emotions take over, I recognize it and I course correct, right? I still can make the mistake, but then I course correct. And a great example of that was a couple of months ago. In one of my last semesters, I'm a university professor, and in one of my last classes, on the last class of the semester, I got 3 emails from 3 different students saying, their dog ate their homework, or they had a family emergency, or, or they were sick 10 minutes before we were supposed to go live and do presentations. Well, I've been teaching for a really long time, and I could smell a liar like from a mile away. And so I knew they were fibbing. And I was angry. I was furious. I thought, do these students think I'm stupid? 10 minutes before this presentation, all of a sudden 3 students had random things happen to them. And so I walked into my class and I was fuming. The students could feel my wrath, and they were all sitting there scared of, what is Carolyn going to do? And, then I said, okay, Barnsley, you're up next. And, my arms are crossed at the back of the room. And I'm like, okay, you go do your presentation. And then halfway through the class, I realized, what am I doing? I'm angry at the wrong students. This is the wake that I was leaving behind from those 3 emails. But I realized that, wait a second, these are the brave ones that showed up to do the assignment. So, an hour and a half into the class, I stopped myself and said, oh my goodness, everyone, I have been in a bad mood because of 3 emails from 3 students who aren't here today. Let me course correct. Let me, first of all, apologize. Let me course correct, and let's make the rest of the last class be a positive experience. Well, I teach university, Barnsley. These are students that as soon as the class is over, they are so out of there so fast, they do not want to hang out with the teacher. It's not like elementary school where kids actually want to, give its if we get an apple as a university professor, it's probably poisonous, right? So, but these students not only were so impressed that I acknowledged my mistake, that I apologized for it, and that I changed my mood, they stuck around with me on a Friday afternoon at 5:30 for a half an hour just to hang out with their teacher. Why? Because for all the other classes, I was a pretty compassionate and caring teacher, but I just, in that one moment, let my emotions get the best out of me. Now, the wonderful thing about emotional intelligence is that's what it's taught me, that even if I make a mistake, that I can look from above and go, wait a second, what are you doing, Carolyn? Let's take the emotional charge out of this. Let's see, what are you doing? You're the director of this film. How can we change the script? And that's what I did. And they were so appreciative. An emotionally strong leader is someone who will publicly admit their mistakes, that when they make a mistake, they'll own it and change and course correct.
They'll be responsible. I love what you're saying. And actually, we've got a comment here. Gloria Grace Rand in the house saying emotional intelligence is an important topic for leaders to understand. Love that Carolyn mentioned setting boundaries too. Thanks for the insightful interview, etc. Thanks for commenting, Gloria. And the rest of you, don't be internet voyeurs. What are you hearing in that story? It's time to really, I just did something, you would laugh, Carolyn. I said how showing your butt crack makes you a better leader. Now, it was obviously on a playful podcast, but I used the acronym of BUTT to talk about BUTT, to talk about being real, just being real, being utterly transparent today. Modeling, being real, owning responsibility for our mistakes, apologizing, like you pointed out, and really owning the fact that none of us are perfect. None of us are perfect. We're here in a human form right now. We're naturally imperfect. I love your story.
Yeah, and we're human. And what I always like to say is, before we're a leader or an employee, we're human, and humans are creatures of emotions, and we're not going to always think logically, even if we want to, or we should. Our emotions can take over. And with the caller that, or with the person that sort of chimed in on Facebook or LinkedIn, the comment that I have is, you can set boundaries and still have compassion. So I can still feel for you and feel with you. Because that's what empathy is feeling with, right? I can feel with you. Hey, I get it. It's the last class, you were upset that, 3 students, missed the last assignment on the last class, which is probably going to give you as the professor way more work to do, and all of those things. But I can also set boundaries and let people know what is okay and what's not okay. So you can be clear and kind, right? So if someone at work is doing something you don't like, there's no problem with you respectfully and professionally telling them, when you do blank, I feel blank. What I'd like you to do in the future is blank. And would you be willing to do that? And if so, how it will benefit us is, if you have those deeper conversations, that will be very helpful into having more emotionally connected conversations, deeper conversations, richer conversations.
I'm actually capturing this up there in the chat because it is so good. That template is fantastic. When you do blank, I feel blank. What I'd like you to do in the future is, or in the future, I would like you to X. Yeah. It's so powerful. It's so proactive, and it doesn't blame the person. It just isolates the behavior. It doesn't say you suck, you're the most horrible boss ever. It just isolates the behavior. When you raise your voice, for example, I feel nervous, and in the future, I would like you to kindly share such feedback in an email. It gives the solution. Everybody, you have got to write down that template. I'm putting it here. Oh, let me hit enter so it goes into the chat. That's fabulous. You can use that at home too.
Yes, and the other 2 pieces to that is asking them the question: would you be willing to do that? Having it, rather than it being a monologue, having it being a dialogue. And then the last point is how it will benefit our relationship, us. So it's not just how it benefits me, the sender of the communication, but how it benefits also the receiver. That's why people, it's a nice way of saying what is okay and what's not okay, letting them know, and then asserting yourself, letting them know what your boundaries are. And the problem is, most people don't know how to do that. Why, Barnsley? Because we never learned this in school. We focus so much on IQ and not nearly enough on EQ.
And we also grew up in really kind of totalitarian regimes a lot of times in our families. The use of corporal punishment. I call it parenting by intimidation, parenting by fear. I was just talking with a colleague about, the fraternity, the big fraternity paddle that I got spanked with, and, this fear that was in me. And it's one of the reasons, Carolyn, that for so long, that and other forms of abuse, for so long, I didn't stand in my voice and in my power. And I believe that, the work you're doing, the work I'm doing, but this work that you're doing with emotional intelligence is so critical, because when we haven't been modeled regulation skills, and we haven't been modeled healthy boundaries, and we haven't been modeled healthy relationships even, we've got to learn it somehow. And if it ain't happening at home, where's it going to happen?
Right
now in a book, or maybe in software,
Yeah, and which is why I wrote the book, is after teaching at the university for 25 years and seeing the problems that the students are facing time and time in, if they're taking on the lion's share of a group project, guess what? We don't teach them how to assert themselves and set boundaries, but we graduate them, and then we send them to the office. And guess what? If you're a people pleaser back and take the lion's share of the work in school, you're going to be a people pleaser and take the lion's share of the work in the office. And that's the point. That's right. And I could see all of the things that are plaguing our modern workforce all stems from the classroom. And so what I realized is, why aren't we teaching this? Well, I know, think about when we were in school and you had a problem with a group member and you go to the teacher for guidance. What does the teacher say? Figure it out. Why? Because the teacher also doesn't know how to figure it out. The problem is none of us have ever figured out how to figure it out. And so it's kind of the blind leading the blind. And I just saw this constant, we focus so much on reading, writing, and arithmetic, and not about how do you deal with setbacks? How do you become emotionally resilient? How do you handle problems when emotions are involved? How do you put yourself in somebody else's shoes? How do you have confidence? How do you be flexible to other people's style? All of those soft skills are things we're not teaching in schools, and then we graduate them and send them to the office.
And you know what, Carolyn? I don't believe they're soft skills, because you and I both know that these are the key. These are the key to your success in life. You're here because we had a conversation, right? You're here because I reached out, not because of anything I ever did academically. I'm not here because of anything you did academically. I loved a presentation that you gave.
Yes.
And I loved the fact that you were just real in how you approach leadership. And this is really it's a new paradigm, and I think it kind of comes on the heels of servant leadership, right? Because we moved from sort of this top-down view of leadership, the leader is like the dictator, they tell you what to do, then to servant leadership, the leader is serving, but that can move us into people pleasing, right?
Yeah.
And now we're getting to this emotionally intelligent, and I just want to say emotionally regulated and emotionally regulating leader.
Well, why I called the book The Emotionally Strong Leader is I wanted people to realize that you can be emotional, which all that means is you feel things deeply and you can be strong. And my best example of me living that out is 10 minutes before I was about to go on stage for a big HR conference with about 400 people in the room. I got a call from my mother saying my father passed away. And I had to do a 60-minute keynote. And I felt a myriad of emotions. My father and I had a very complicated relationship. I felt grief. I felt sadness. I felt regret. I felt disappointment. I felt anger. I felt it all. But in that 10-minute roller coaster, I also needed to know that I had to park my emotions and still do my job and not let my emotions take over the keynote. I still needed to share my knowledge. And what emotional intelligence has taught me is you can be strong as well as emotional. I still was feeling things. And at the end of my keynote, I said, this keynote is to him. And I made a tribute to him. And the audience was in awe because they had no idea what was going on for me internally because I didn't express it externally. And here's the thing that's interesting about emotions. There's two parts to it. It's what's expressed and what's experienced. So the challenge is I might experience sadness, but I don't necessarily have to express it. And so the problem at work is people feel like they can't share their emotions, right?
Especially anger.
Well, and this is the problem. You can smile at your desk, but you better cry in the bathroom, right?
You're like this.
That's right. We overvalue positive emotions and undervalue negative ones. But guess what? Anger, sadness, frustration, stress, all of those emotions give you information. They tell you something about you, the situation. And if we start to pay attention to the meaning it provides, then we can do something with that knowledge.
And you know what? In sales, in enrollment, I don't like to call it sales, but in enrollment, think about it. When people will enroll in something, they enroll not because usually of the upliftment, but because of pain. There's some kind of pain. They've lost a job, they've lost a person, they've lost themselves, whatever it is, there's some loss, some deep pain. And that's why people enroll. As a society, I think this is where I've lived in other places in the world, and I think you have too. And it's times that I say, oh, we Americans, we're just like, sometimes we're like this, I'm fine. We're not fine at all. And we get to deal with these parts of ourselves. And if we don't, then we're going to see the underbelly coming out. And I believe this is why we have so many shootings, so much violence, so much just pain happening in our society, in our culture, because people aren't feeling those emotions that aren't culturally acceptable.
That's right. And it's interesting you talk about Gallup did a study, and they've been doing it since 2009. And they asked people, did you feel a lot of blank the previous day? And the four emotions they measured was stress, worry, anger, and sadness. Well, the trajectory of those lines have all increased each year as it goes on. But the one that I found most disturbing is stress. Did you know that 44% of employees are feeling a lot of stress the previous day? So my question to you and to your listeners is, what do you think the collective results are when people are feeling a lot of stress, worry, anger, and sadness? Well, probably not very good, probably not very productive. Probably there's going to be burnout. There's going to be, misunderstandings, miscommunications. There's probably going to be not a lot of creativity. All of these things, emotions impact everything. They matter. They affect our creativity. They affect our innovation. They affect our decision-making. They affect our communication. They affect our relationships, our health. And what I keep telling people is, at work, we're measuring performance. And what I find extremely frustrating is how you feel at work affects how you perform at work. And if people started to pay attention to how I was feeling, right, and got to the heart of the issue rather than skirting around it and pretending it doesn't exist. Now, listen, leaders do not need to be anyone's emotional therapist. We're not qualified, frankly, or at least a lot of us aren't. But what you do have to do as a leader is to be brave enough to say, Barnsley, I see you stomping down the hallway, and the story I'm telling myself is you're angry. Is that correct? And you might say, no, I'm not angry at all. I'm just frustrated because I got an unrealistic deadline. Well, then that awareness for you, the difference between anger and frustration, there are two different causal differences. Anger stems from an violation, an unfairness, an injustice. Well, as frustration stems from unmet expectations. Well, if you know these two things, you can do something about it. And so every emotion, positive or negative, provides us a gift if we're brave enough to stop, pay attention. What am I feeling? And what is that feeling telling me about me, the situation, and others? And then from that knowledge, you can do something about it. The problem is none of us have ever learned how to do that.
And we don't even understand the gradations of feelings. And oftentimes we don't even understand what a feeling is. Somebody will say, how are you feeling? And we'll say uptight, but that's really a symptom. It's not the feeling. The feeling is nervousness, or the feeling is fear. The feeling, we just really don't even understand that. And I remember, I'm right out there in Bold Badass Business. We just speak it the way it is. I had a therapist hand me a page full of, a counselor hand me a page full of all these feelings. And I looked at it and I was like, OMG, I never saw such a big list of emotions. It's kind of happy, sad, proud. There were maybe 6 or 8 that I understood. And this is why in education, especially I believe in elementary and secondary education, we've got to be teaching our children how to name the emotion
Yes.
and then to deal with it. And so then when they get to you at university level, or to me before when I taught university, then they're fine. They're good. They've learned.
Yes. And here's what's interesting about and I'm gonna share a link in the chat with you, and you can share it with everyone online. But we have an emotions poster. And it's exactly what your therapist gave you. It's a list of 30 different emotions and little icons that people can start to. Now, there are thousands of emotions out there, like you said, Barnsley. But what this poster does, and by the way, it's above my desk right now as we speak, but it reminds me at least 3 times a day to pay attention to how I'm feeling. Before I walked into this podcast, how am I feeling? Before my next class, how am I feeling? Before my next meeting, what am I feeling? And even though there's only 30 emotions on our poster, is it reminds us, yeah, there are different nuances. Am I happy? Am I elated? Or am I content? They're both levels of happiness. Like, where am I on this continuum? But knowing the different nuances, as you were saying, is really critical. But all of us have had a not a very good emotional vocabulary. Like, we don't have a robust emotional vocabulary. Yet I find it interesting, if I asked you the difference between there, THERE, and there, THEIR, probably every one of your listeners would know the difference. If I asked you the difference between frustration and anger and what causes that, we're like a deer in headlights. We don't know. And these are two feelings we feel on a regular basis. That's what I find ironic.
Yes, we need so much more awareness and really, yes, to understand what's really going on, because when we don't, we've heard it said, what you resist persists.
That's
and
right.
I believe that what we resist shows up in depression, which is like anger turned inwards, or it can show up in violence, which is anger turned outwards, in my opinion. And we've got to really learn to deal with this stuff and clean up our acts, so to speak, so that we can be free. Yes. But, and freedom comes from just, I cry. I am an easy crier. And for the longest time, it was not something I could do, Carolyn, because it wasn't modeled to me. Nobody cried nobody cried. And I just felt ignored as a kid. I pretty much was. So I chose academics to excel. And that served me well in some ways, but it also made me so auto-sufficient.
Well, right? See, that's the interesting thing about our upbringing, right? How we were raised impacts how we show up today, and who we are is how we lead. And so I think, for me, for instance, you might have you might be on the dark side, as I call, when you have too much of a skill. So on my case, I have low independence, which means I need a lot of validation. Why? Because I had a helicopter parent. My mother kind of hovered over me to make sure I was okay, and overprotected me and was excessively involved in my life. And so I learned to be emotionally dependent on her. You, on the other hand, who might have been raised that you didn't feel comfortable or safe to share your feelings, became really self-sufficient and self-directed. Well, the dark side of independence, when you're too independent, you never ask for help. You might not be seen as a team player, right? Exactly. And so it's figuring out when you've swung too far or not far enough. So if we take the two of us, here's a skill that we both have on different ends of the spectrum. I need to become a little bit more independent, and you need to become a little bit less. And so your homework, your EQ homework, would be, hey, I want you to ask for help. Even when you don't.
It's interesting that you asked me, you said, Barnsley, are you doing this show on your own?
Well, that's it.
I said, right? Well, I have a VA and I'm learning to give her things. Right. But, it's so true. It's so true. And you know what? Your story, when you told that story in your book, when you told the story about your helicopter mom, and by the way, if you're just tuning in, you must get Carolyn's book, The Emotionally Strong Leader. Well, that story actually made me look at my parenting with my daughter, who is going through some things at age 17 right now. And it made me really look at myself and think, how am I enabling her? to be in a place of dependence. And
Well,
I really appreciate that
I'm
story.
glad. I'm glad you just, so let me tell you one thing that's going to make you think about it even more. The younger generation, the Gen Zs, studies show they are lower at problem solving, lower at stress tolerance, and lower at independence than any generation before them. Why? Because they grew up with phones and helicopter parents. The worst thing you can do as a parent, and the worst thing we can do as leaders, is when a young person comes to us with a problem, is to give them the answer. Why? Because you need to remember, as parents and as leaders, you are teachers. And as a teacher who's been doing this for 25 years at the university, I know the answers to my students' tests. And if I give it to them, they ain't learning. The best thing you can do when your child or when an employee comes to you with a problem is to say, what do you think you should do? Because then you are teaching them to become more resourceful, better of a problem solver. And if you know the Gen Zers are worse at problem solving, stress tolerance, and independence, then they're already going to be naturally defaulted to come to you for the answers. So how you are enabling your children is to continue that and it really is a codependent relationship. You give them the answers, they keep coming back. The best
feeding. I left that behind.
That's it. And the best thing you
one or two, right?
That's right. The best thing you can do is to say, I have an idea, but before I share my solution to your problem, I'd love to hear yours. Because then
you're a coach, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So good for you. I'm glad you're looking at your own parenting because, again, my mother meant the best. She wanted the best for me. But sometimes by giving, and this is the problem even with society, even this chat GPT and all of AI generated, it's giving them, if the generation is already dependent and we're providing easy tools for them. Like I just asked my students to do a book report. 5 out of the 6 groups use ChatGPT to write their book report. They did not use it as a tool. They used it as a replacement. So how did I figure that out? Well, I'm a smart cookie. And so what I did is I put their book report through ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT, did you write this book report? And ChatGPT spewed out the answers saying, yes, it's AI generated. So when I failed all of them and shared with them, why they got a failing grade, none of them argued. But that's a really tough lesson, but an important lesson for them to learn is just like calculators back in our day, it is a tool, not a replacement. And so ChatGPT can be a wonderful resource, but it should not replace them using their brains to critically
original ideas. Yes.
That's
we
right.
Should start with our original ideas and then put them through.
That's right.
But start with the original ideas and sometimes use it for brainstorming. But I would say, always use your own ideas and then put those through and ask it to speak in a certain way, customize it the way you want. We must, and I have some really great interviews on this, by the way, everyone listening, with Laura Templeton and some Talon McTavish on AI and how we need to be the directors of it. We don't need it. We are the master, not AI. And that's exactly what you're pointing out. I'm so glad you're so smart. You put it through and said, did you write this? And Sassy Pants Chat GPT said, yes, I did. And isn't it great?
That's right.
Man. Hey, we've got a comment here, Carolyn. It's a really great comment. Jan Jeremiah says, I always ask people where they feel the emotion in their body. Also, being a somatic and movement specialist, sometimes we can feel it and have a hard time articulating the emotion, right? I'm a kinesthetic learner, so I totally get you, Jan. This allows my clients to process it a little and come to a place that they can actually verbally begin to express it. I think I'm missing a little bit of our comment.
And I think the bottom line is sometimes our body knows before our minds do, right? I don't know about you, but I have been stressed and didn't realize I was stressed until I got a migraine. And I went, oh, wow, I'm really, I'm really tense and stressed. And it wasn't until I paid attention to my body sensations that I went, okay, how am I feeling? So sometimes the body knows. So I agree with your listener that sometimes the body knows before the mind does.
And think about the word disease, dis-ease. Think
Mm,
about it. When we get in a state of feeling like we're struggling, right? We're not in a state of ease. We're
yes.
stressed. The
Yes.
cortisol levels are up. I mean, it is shown, this scientific studies show that this does cause disease eventually in the body,
Yes.
So our bodies are going to register, I believe, they're going to register what we don't express, what we don't feel.
Yes.
And, there's some great work out there by Dr. Daniel Amen and Bessel van der Kolk. I think that's the correct pronunciation of his name. The Body Keeps the Score. There's some fabulous books out there about this very fact. And especially when trauma is involved, it gets stored in the body.
Yes.
And,
and it's interesting for you when you shared that as you were reading the book, you kind of looked back at your own childhood, about your own upbringing. And I found when I did that to figure out, why am I the way I am, which I talk a lot about in the book, right? Learning your why. Why am I needing so much validation? Why am I not self-directed? Why don't I trust my judgments? Why am I so needy? Once I kind of understood my why, without blame or judgment, it is what it is. My mother overprotected me, love her to pieces because she loved me so much. But yeah, I didn't learn that skill. And just like muscles at a gym, you are building emotional intelligent muscles. And inside we have 15 different muscles. Some of them are overutilized, some of them are underutilized. So my independence is in there. It's just underutilized, just like my six-pack, underutilized. But it's interesting for you, Barnsley, for you to think about, okay, mine was, I was so independent that I didn't ever ask for help. Now, the question that I always ask my clients is, how is that getting in your way of being your best self, that you don't ask for help? We talked earlier before the podcast came on is, yeah, you're doing everything on your own, right? And having a hard time letting.
I've got a team now, but it's still in progress. It's a work in progress.
Right. And it's hard to let go, because the story you tell yourself is, oh, I could do it better, or, or whatever it is, or maybe it's a trust issue. Or
here's my story, Carolyn. If I don't do it, no one else will.
Because why? And why do you feel that way?
Because nobody else did.
What
I mean? Right? I get it.
Well, that's it. Because in your past, that's what happened. And so you are looking for evidence, confirmation bias. You are looking for evidence that you're still right. That, just because they didn't do it in my past, that means they're going to not do it in my future. But are you asking? And so
reticular activation.
That's right.
You all, that's what we're talking about. You decide you're going to buy a car. This is the example people like to give a lot. You decide you're going to buy a Ferrari, and suddenly you're seeing Ferraris everywhere, even though we know Ferraris aren't everywhere.
That's right.
It takes a special person to have a Ferrari, but you have activated your brain, and now they're everywhere. And the same is true of our patterns. And we do, even when it's holding us back. We so often want to be right about the story.
That's right.
And
how is that serving you? Right.
And is the story serving us? And I'm always talking to my clients about, that story, how's that helping you? Is it helping you? What other stories could you tell yourself? And what would you enjoy better? That's always, that's the transformational leadership training that I've had, is really getting down in there, because we do script it. I mean, truthfully, in consciousness, we choose. Now, things are going to happen. Everybody listening, don't think I'm not saying, somebody's going to die, you're going to lose a job, you're going to maybe lose a marriage, whatever. Things are going to happen. But we do have that place, that choice point of how we interpret it, how we react, what the story we tell about the event. The event itself is neutral. The person died, we're all going to die. That's really a neutral thing. It wasn't like the universe said, okay, I'm going to take away, Carolyn's sister. It was neutral. But we invest it with a particular meaning, and then we often attach emotion to it. Carolyn, something I was thinking about is when you were talking about emotion, what is emotion? Energy in motion.
That's right. That's right.
It's energy in motion.
And then paying attention to how that energy is manifesting in your life, right? For me, when I mentioned migraines, I get a lot of them, but I don't pay it. A lot of times I'm not paying attention. My body is like, it's not like all of a sudden a migraine comes on. There are little inklings of it showing up. It's almost like a little pebble hits my head and I ignore it, and a pebble hits my head and I ignore it, and then all of a sudden the wall comes crashing down and go, oh yeah, maybe I should have paid attention to those signs. And so it's really, again, going back and being that observer of yourself and seeing what's going on with your body sensations, what's going on with your feelings. And I think a lot of time in business, we're focusing so much on the communication, the decision you have to make, but people want to know what's behind your decision. Why are you saying what you're saying?
Yes.
Why are you doing what you're doing? And that's kind of what I call those inner iceberg conversations. Are you asking your people, what are you afraid of? What motivates you? What fills your bucket? What are your concerns? What are your aspirations? What are your beliefs? What are your feelings? All of those things impact our behavior and communication, but we don't tend to talk about those things. I just tell you the decision. And it reminds me of math class. Remember in math class, they always said to you, show your work. Well, that's kind of what emotional intelligence is telling people externally what's going on for you internally. So just like in math class where I had to show you how I came to this conclusion, can you tell your staff, your people, your family why you're doing what you're doing, why you're saying what you're saying? How did you come to that conclusion? That's when you're going to have open and transparent conversations and get to the heart of the issue, rather than dealing with disrespectful communications or unproductive behaviors.
And, so much of this, to take us back to the word you used earlier, is triggers. Understanding triggers, I believe triggers are there to serve us, because the trigger shows us where we're coming from internally. So I would not, if you said to me something, oh, you were late, whatever, and that wasn't a trigger, then I know there's nothing around that for me, right? If I don't get triggered. But if I do get triggered, that means I've got a story that I get to unwrap. I've got a story about who I am that I get to unpack if I choose to.
The problem is not everyone knows what their own triggers are, and we certainly don't know each other's triggers. So for me, if you were to send me an email with the word should or I deserve, I want to give you a wedgie. Why? Because I am very triggered by entitlement. Why?
Yes.
Because my father was very entitled, and that's a big trigger for me. But you wouldn't know that unless I told you. Here's what I'm noticing about triggers. All a trigger is a person, situation, or thing that creates an emotional reaction. That's all it is. And so if we start to identify what our triggers are, is entitlement a trigger? Is being dismissed a trigger? Is lack of clarity a trigger? Is a rocky handoff of a project a trigger? Is lateness a trigger? What are your triggers? And you can't avoid them because they're going to happen, but how can you at least know what they are, name them, and then you can tame them. You can figure out, okay, so a perfect example is my fiance and I were going on our first trip together. And I said to him, what triggers you when you travel? And he said, being late for the airport. I said, okay, no problem. And he said, what triggers you? And I said, losing my stuff. So what did we do? We made sure that we were there 3 hours early at the airport. And we made sure everything valuable that was important to me was in my carry-on. Well, guess what? We had a stress-free vacation. And so if we can start having those inner iceberg conversations, the things that are really going on underneath the surface, then we can have deeper, more meaningful conversations and really get to the heart of the issues of what matters.
And we can really express love, because it truly is an act of caring, to care enough to say, hey, what's going on? What's triggering you right now, and why?
That's right.
I know I was thinking about this the other day, and it must be in preparation for this. It was on my mind. I was shushed by somebody that I went to school with. And if you understand, Carolyn, here I was, this budding feminist, right? And he was the valedictorian, and he was so smart, and he was a white man, right? And here I'm coming in, and I didn't have all the stuff he had. I didn't have the family support he had. I didn't have these things that he had. And I was a woman, right? And I had been extremely shy. And so I, in many ways, felt shushed. Well, he did this to me last year. And I immediately said, and I was with all our friends, I said, "Did you just shush me? You did not, did you?" And my friend Kathleen was like, "Ooh, ooh."
Right.
But the reason was because I had felt shushed in my life. Like, it's not okay for you to speak. And owning that and realizing this is why I'm reacting this way.
That's right. So if you could reverse time, maybe the better way to say that to him is, when you shush me, I feel
super sad and left out and ignored and unimportant.
And what I'd like you to do in the future is what?
And what I'd like you to do in the future is listen to what I have to say before you speak what you need to say.
That's right. And would you be willing to do that? And hopefully
Carolyn,
he says,
there was a little bit of alcohol involved, I have to say. More than a little. We'd all be having some wine.
Fair enough. But
yeah.
The last thing you need to ask is how it will benefit both of you. Is what?
And this will benefit both of us because we get to support each other rather than feeling like we're in competition.
That's
and
right.
Everyone gets to be heard. Yes. Right. And hindsight is always better, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. But this is powerful. And for those of you just tuning in, if you look over here in the chat, when you do X, I feel Y. In the future, I would like you to X. Would you be willing to do that? And then if they say yes, then you emphasize how it would benefit the relationship of both of you. What a great template that is. Mm-hmm. Carolyn, you and I could talk for hours. We absolutely could. We have so much to share. And I love the work you're doing. I think it's really revolutionary. And I really think we're moving into, I'm going to say, a more feminine paradigm. I don't mean female, I mean feminine. We all have masculine energies and feminine energies, but we're moving into a more feminine energy or feminine paradigm in which we are more in touch with our feelings. And it's not about just speaking what we think and being logical. It's about sensing and intuiting and supporting and listening and all of that. So I really think what you're doing is very important.
Thank you.
And I'm coming from the fact that we all matter. We all matter. Every voice matters.
Yes, absolutely. And to me, what emotional intelligence is at its finest is speaking your truth respectfully and professionally. That's really what it is. And I think, growing up in a family that kids should be seen and not heard, I just wanted a voice. And what this emotional intelligence has taught me over the last 25 years is how to give my emotions a voice. Without any judgment or criticism, but just to share how I'm feeling in a non-offensive and respectful way.
Beautiful. And you all, I just put the chat into the chat, the link for the emotional poster where you can differentiate between your emotions. So you can grab that. Those of you watching on YouTube may need to go over to Facebook for that, but they can also find it at eiexperience.com. You can find it there. Just go to like emotional intelligence experience.com, and you'll be able to find that poster. And what an incredible tool. And like you said, Carolyn, you put it right up here so you can, above your computer, so you can just always be asking yourself, what am I feeling? And letting ourselves feel it so it doesn't own us.
That's right.
We're in the driver's seat. Let it go through. You have been an amazing guest. And you all, by the way, we are getting the vault, my VA, Carolyn, my VA, and I are getting a vault ready where all of you will be able to go to my website, spirited-solutions.com, and you'll be able to access a vault of all the incredible gifts from all the guests on Bold Badass Business. And we will also, of course, be listing Carolyn's poster there. And you can go and just, even if you didn't hear an episode, you can still get the free gift. And I mean, that is thousands of dollars of amazing, amazing shared work from the guests. So I just want to thank you again, Carolyn. And to those of you listening, you may not feel like a badass today. Your feelings may have kind of carried you away a little bit and you're not feeling like a badass. but you are, or you would not be tuning into this episode. Remember, you matter. Your message matters, and somebody's life depends on you. Thanks, and I'll see y'all next week for Bold Badass Business.
Thanks for having me.
So glad you were here, Carolyn. You rocked it.